You know him by now, founder and executive director of Robinhood, David Saltzman.
Lee, good work. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Paul. Let's give it up for Lee Ainsley and Paul Jones one more time. I am honored to introduce our last two guests. You know both of them. I first met Stephanie Ruhle before she became a terrific journalist when she was working at Deutsche Bank. She and her husband came to Robinhood and said, we want to be involved. And not only did they become donors, but they became volunteers. They gave their time, they gave their brains. And together, both of them have helped save lives here in New York City. She's going to be interviewing Mike Bloomberg. Now, it is extraordinarily rare to meet a brilliant entrepreneur. It is also extraordinarily rare to meet a brilliant philanthropist. And it is even rarer to meet an absolutely brilliant three-time mayor of the city of New York. There is only one person on the entire planet who is all of those things, and that's Mayor Mike Bloomberg. So, yes, go ahead. You know he founded Bloomberg, 73 countries, hundreds of thousands of users around the world. You know that as a philanthropist, he has saved lives in so many ways. But what you may not know is that he has given away $3.3 billion to make this planet a better place. He is the UN Secretary General's special envoy on climate change. And here's the thing I want to talk about for one moment. Like many of you, I grew up in New York City. And as a kid in the 1970s, my mother would give me $5 or $10 every morning when I went to school. And it was called mug money because there was a real probability that I was going to be mugged going to or coming home from school. And sure enough, at least a couple of times a year, I had to give that mug money to a group of bigger kids who threatened me with a knife or something like that. Thanks to Mayor Bloomberg, right, my kids, who are now 18 and 20, never experienced anything like that. Right? When he was mayor, he cut crime by 32%. Right? When we started Robinhood 27 years ago, there were maybe 5 good schools out of 1,400 public schools at the time, 5 good ones for poor children. By the time that he left being mayor, there were hundreds of great schools for poor New York children. That's why the 4-year high school graduation rate in this city increased by more than 40% on his watch. He has done more to fight poverty than anybody I've ever met. Please welcome Stephanie Ruhle and Mike Bloomberg. That was okay.
Good afternoon. Hello.
Mike, thank you. David, thank you. Thank you so much for having me back. And Mike, thank you for having me here. I promise to give this interview the same level of scrutiny and intensity I did earlier this afternoon.
Let me just point out to you that you don't work for him.
Yes, yes. I do know that, yes.
But you know, if your husband and kids don't mind you being unemployed, that's okay. Feel free.
There you go. Well, luckily, I would be unemployed on the streets of New York City where it's really safe, thanks
right.
to
That's
you,
good.
and clean. So it works out. One thing Bill and I did talk about, this is the second time he's done it. A few weeks ago, I interviewed Bill Ackman, and he said, I need 10 minutes at the end of the interview to give my best idea for 2016. So I waited, and the last 10 minutes came, and he gave a full, formal presentation on Mike Bloomberg for
How long
president.
did it take? He's never done anything in 10 minutes.
Very true, very true. And he reiterated that sentiment today. So Mike, how about it?
number one, I'm not going to run. Number two, I could not win. Somebody once pointed out to me that in New York City, with a population of 8.4 million people, if my approval ratings were 90%, it still would mean that 840,000 people do not like me. And all of those people vote as well. So you just can't win if you're a business person or if you were a mayor and you actually did something. Because one of the things that you have to be able to do in a national election is to appeal to everybody. And so you want to say things that both sides hear what they want to hear. And then later on, if you ever looked at the words, you'd say, well, I didn't think they said that. But that's a skill that somebody that was a mayor or a business person that had actually done things can't have. I can't pretend to be very right-wing or pretend to be very left-wing. I've got a record. And the same thing most business people would and most mayors would. Whereas somebody once said when they were running for office, it was a senator running for president of the United States, and he said, I voted for the war, but I didn't vote to fund it, which is like saying I'm pro-choice but not for women. And you can't do that. So you'd never get, somebody like me would never get the nomination of either party, and you can't really run as an independent because 40% of this country will vote Democratic, even if Sarah Palin were their candidate, and I always say 40% would vote Republican, even if Trotsky were their candidate, and you can't get 300% in the middle of the remaining 20%. The math just doesn't work. And if you ran, even if you had more electoral votes than the two-party candidates, you wouldn't have 50%. And it goes to the House, and the way the Constitution works, the House of Representatives would pick the next president, and that would be, in this case, because the Republicans control it, probably Republicans.
A year ago, I would have said, you're right, Mike. But now here we are. And we are faced with a scenario where people are looking at Donald Trump as he is gaining more momentum and more support, many of whom, one of the reasons they like him is because they kind of think he is what you actually are.
No, but
and many reasons he's become so successful, so much traction is because people have said, it's so crazy, it just might work.
Well, I think you got to be careful. All conventional wisdom is generally wrong, saying that a Jew couldn't win. Nobody stops and says that Bernie Sanders is a Jew. Bernie Sanders is a lefty. Nobody says that Donald Trump is a billionaire. Donald Trump is this brash righty. And these guys typically aren't there at the end. If you go back and look, there's always a Ross Perot kind of person that made a big splash at the beginning, but then after things quiet down, an awful lot of these potential candidates drop out and you're left with a handful. If I had to bet today, I would bet that Hillary Clinton is the Democratic nominee and on the Republican side, it'll probably be one of the more traditional candidates. I always thought, as did a lot of other people, that it would be Jeb Bush. Rubio seems to be doing better at the time. If you ask yourself who of all of these candidates can run the railroad, can execute, can direct a 4 million person organization, Hillary can argue that she can. She didn't run a company, but she was Secretary of State, and she was a senator, and she was in the White House with her husband for 8 years. And on the Republican side, Bush and Kasich both were governors and have a lot of executive experience. If you don't have the executive experience, then it's much tougher to run the railroad. And I think you can see that when you have a president, for example, Barack Obama, who's intelligent and a great American and really cares, but his expertise is not in terms of directing people, attracting people, getting them to contribute ideas, distilling them, and coming up with a consensus. He is much more of a loner, and executives are the reverse. Executives pull people together and get the best out of all of them.
So let's just say those aren't the candidates. Let's say we make it through the primaries, and it is Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. At that moment, could you say...
No, by that time it'd be much too late to enter the race anyways.
But as we're getting closer, and it looks like, let's say it looks like that could be happening.
If you wanted to run as an independent, you'd have to do it by March to get on the ballot. It's actually too late now to get on the ballot in every state for the primaries, but for the general election you could. Look, Stephanie, it does not work. I think we've got to find a ways to whoever gets elected to work with them, and hopefully whoever gets elected will have an interest in governing as opposed to just policies. You've got to pull people together. Bill Clinton was actually pretty good at it. Clinton would play golf every Saturday and Sunday, and Barack Obama plays golf every Saturday and Sunday, or pretty much. The difference is Barack Obama plays with his friends, and Bill Clinton would play with 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats, and he'd play 9 holes with each, and then they'd go, and they'd break out the cigars and the scotch and close the doors and tell dirty jokes, and he'd build sort of a camaraderie. Doesn't mean everybody'd vote with you, but one of the differences between business and government, and it explains maybe why government doesn't work as well. If I wanted something from you, I would walk up, kiss you, and then ask you for something. In government, they walk up, hit you with a 2x4 on the side of the head and ask, and they wonder why it doesn't work. And I can tell you why it doesn't work.
Well, we haven't had any kissing at work since you've come back.
We did not, at least not that we're going to tell anybody.
That's true. But since you have come back, you've spent how many months now back at the company? Almost a year.
Yeah, 2 years actually, because I took a little bit of vacation for a few weeks at the beginning, but I finished in City Hall December 31st, 2013.
So during this time, as you've refocused your efforts, media, for example, you went from having a media property to being the subject of media, and now here you are back. What have you learned? What do you want to do?
Well, the difference between government and business is a lot less than people would think. Conventional wisdom, people in business think everybody in government is lazy and stupid, and everybody in government thinks everybody in business is a crook and all they care about is money, and neither are true. My experience is on both sides there are some people who are brilliant and people who are dedicated, and then some on the other side that aren't and are lazy and aren't. Everybody wants recognition and respect. Some people want compensation in dollars. Some people want compensation in terms of satisfaction. So if you want to have a great life, go become a public school teacher. You can change the world. You can help an enormous number of people. You can look in the mirror and be very proud of what you see before you turn off the lights. You're not going to make a lot of money. On the other hand, you could go make a lot of money and then go in and, like Paul Tudor Jones and Lee Ainsley and Bill Ackman and use the money. Yeah, I mean, I take great pride in what we do. I own 86%, I think it is, of my company, and 86% of our profits go to Bloomberg Philanthropies. And when I die, the whole company will go to Bloomberg Philanthropies. And I spend some time on it. It's setting policy and giving some speeches and that sort of thing. We have some very competent people running the foundation. And I'm back running the company and very happy to do it. And we've got some great people there. Dan Doctoroff, who was there, did a great job. I'm sorry he left. Peter Grauer did a great job. He's still there. Tom Secunda. And 20,000 people.
Growth is the key. I'm going to guess a massive proportion of people in this room are Bloomberg terminal users. And
can you give me a list of those that aren't?
And have been for decades. Where are you going to grow, Mike? Do you need to?
Yeah, you have to keep growing and you have to keep innovating or companies go out of business. And in this day and age, they can go out of business very rapidly. I mean, just remember what happened to Eastman Kodak literally overnight and companies like that. It's really hard to find a company and an industry that isn't being disrupted by technology and new practices and people thinking about the world differently than they did before. But for our company, we have to keep growing in terms of new products, new ways of looking at those products. We have to go into new businesses. The biggest growth part of our company is helping big institutions with compliance and clearing and accounting kinds of things, enterprise software we would call it. But there's a new product every day. There's a new exchange that trades a new product every day. There's new ways of looking at it. And it's going to be a very competitive world for our company and for everybody else. But the ways to compete is not to worry about your competition, but to go out and keep doing things. And also, I think a lot of companies make a mistake. Conventional wisdom is you have to listen to your customer. And I would argue that what you really want to do is you want to hear your customer as opposed to listen. And then you want to go and build what you think your customers are going to need down the road. And the two groups that don't know what your customers are going to need down the road are your customers and your sales force, because they have this big vested interest in what they're doing. They do it well, they do it successfully, and for them, it's hard to believe that that's not going to work tomorrow. They all have a vested interest. It's the typical innovator's dilemma that Clay Christensen wrote about. It's like when I was in office, I wasn't elected to ask everybody in this room, where do you want to go, and then push you in that direction. I was elected, I thought, to tell you where I think we should go, convince you to come along behind me and lead from the front. And companies that are successful have to do that as well. You have to push your customers into taking the next generation so that they don't get left behind.
Technology companies, mature ones, struggle. Many of them can't seem to find that next chapter in terms of innovation. Oftentimes, it's because they've grown so big, their culture is stagnant.
That's what Christensen wrote about. You see, you have stockholders and employees and egos and whatever, and you see something coming down the road, and in your pit of your stomach, you think maybe that is this next thing that's going to kill you, but you can't stop. You can't get off the merry-go-round to take it on. Now, some companies start a skunk works. Some companies just stand there like a deer in the headlights. Some companies manage to do two things at once, and that's our strategy, what we've got to do. I want to keep the basic products going, but always have the next best thing bubbling along, and when the next best thing doesn't work, make sure the people that were working on it feel that they were part of it and that didn't hurt their careers that it didn't work. They did what I asked them to do, take a risk, and then go on to the next thing. In fact, I would argue, I was in London the other day speaking, and the question was why I was in Paris, I guess, and the question was, why is all the innovation still coming out of America, even though there's some brilliant people all around the world and great companies, but the real innovation still comes out of the United States. And I think it's a cultural thing more than anything else. You talk to somebody and this woman says, oh, my son, he's on his fourth company. The other three were all disasters, but there's no stigma to try something, and if it doesn't work, or at least there's not a big stigma. If you go to other countries, people look down on you when you try something and it doesn't work. And so you don't have this constant people willing to try new things, but also doing it enough times so that finally something gets through the process and bubbles up.
Do you think you have been able to try things that haven't worked in part because you never had shareholders to answer to?
Well,
and as you look at other companies and CEOs who have to do that, is it exponentially harder?
Look, it is easier to go into government if you're a billionaire. It's easier to run a company when you have a private company and don't have to answer to anybody. I haven't worked for anybody for 35 years, and I'm not about to start now, so I'm not going to run a public company. I'd be the last person that should do that. But that doesn't mean you can't be successful in government when you have to go out and raise campaign funds. You just have to say to the donors, you know, you're going to get a little access, but you're not going to buy me, and make sure that that's the real case. And in government, you've got to say, in business, you've got to say, look, we have regulatory requirements and stockholders to take care of, but still lead and explain to them. I think it's more difficult in a public company. It's more difficult without the money in the government sector, but certainly not impossible.
Then why don't we see stronger leadership in corporate America or government? Like what you're saying command the audience, say, this is how I'm going to lead. We're not seeing that.
Well, the business people tend not to go into government because of disclosure, which is one of the big things, and also I think they're just a little bit scared of it in the same ways that government people are scared of the private sector. Why don't we get better executives? The life expectancy of CEOs has been going down. It's fascinating. With all the more communications, all the texting and messaging, the number of phone calls that executives make have not declined. And it's hard to argue that executives are doing better today, given the life expectancy. You'd think that if they were doing better, they would survive longer, and they don't seem to be. One of the differences in our world is social media. It is much more difficult to run a government, much more difficult to run a company when there is all of this chatter going back and forth. And I would argue the real impact of social media is in terms of who talks. If you think about it, Plato stood up in the forum and he talked, and then somebody invented paper, and so he could write it down and put it on the temple wall, and then along came Gutenberg, and you could put it on every church's wall, and then along came Marconi, and you could do it in sound, and then RCA or Bell Labs, whoever invented television, you could do it with pictures. But up until now, communications has always been one direction. It is from the wealthy, powerful out to the public. And you also had the knowledge of who was saying it, so you could look at their credibility and who was advising them and that sort of thing. Along comes social media, and it's exactly reversed. Now, communication's two ways. So the first time, the recipients have had a chance to talk upstream, and also you can hide who you are so you don't really know. So, I mean, the people that think Oliver Stone is a historian. There are people that think in 140 characters you can solve complex problems. That's fundamentally different than what it was before, and it makes it much more difficult to be innovative. You don't have the time frame, if you're an elected official, of starting getting elected, having some programs, tweaking them if they're not working, replacing those that are not working, then going convince the voters for the next election. Right now, there's an instant referendum on you all the time. Same thing in business. Your stockholders are very activist in this day and age because of disclosure required by the SEC. Everybody says disclosure is great, but don't ask for something you don't want. Sometimes disclosure is not so great. You really do have to, if you're running a business, be able to pick, I want to talk to this young lady about maybe coming to work for us. And if her name is going to be in the paper right away, she's not going to talk to me, and her boss is not going to be happy. Whoever you are, if you want to come, thank you. So it's all of this stuff that we think it's good, but I'm not so sure that it makes it easier or really is that good.
Then what are in your core values in terms of traditional media? You have a media property, and this is a time when there is more content than ever. You have platforms like Twitter where anyone becomes a journalist, anyone becomes a newsmaker, and you have a news organization with abnormally high standards in what you put out there, and you're not beholden to advertisers or sponsor demands. So
no, but we would like some advertising. It'd be good. Media is a non-profitable business generally, if you define media as radio, television, magazines, that sort of stuff. Why? Because everybody pretty much has the same thing. And if everybody has the same thing, you don't have any pricing power. The reason that Bloomberg has done well is we have some news, whether it's numbers, graphs, text, sound, video, that a certain group of people, business people, financial people, need, and they can't get elsewhere. And if they could get it elsewhere, then we wouldn't have the pricing power that we want, that we have right now. If we didn't have stuff that they want, they would not pay for, get through our firewall, if you will, to get to us. And so what you've got to really do is find something that is unique and make sure that it's hard to copy. That's the other thing. When you look at people that start these businesses, they have a great idea. It's an app that lets you lock your garage door from 3,000 miles away. Well, number one, I don't know why you'd want to do that, so the function of it isn't all that great. But number two, I don't know how you'd monetize it, so if you don't have any revenue, what's the point? And number three, if it catches on, everybody else can build the app right away, so there's no ways to protect yourself. And if you're going to have a successful business, you've got to have a raison d'etre, you've got to have an ability to charge for it, and you've got to have an ability to protect it. And most people, there aren't that many companies that do that.
Then are you not as excited as so many other people are when it comes to Silicon Valley and this disruptive innovation and all of this technology, these fantastic new companies that raise money but don't actually report if they make any?
Well, I've been through, I'm 73 years old, and I've been through a number of cycles. I came to Wall Street in 1966. This time it's different, and of course it's never different. We have bubbles, and then they go down precipitously, and then we build up until the second derivative starts getting greater, and then all of a sudden it collapses. I'm surprised the stock market is where it is today. But these valuations are relatively meaningless. They're good numbers. Oh, it's worth $1 billion. To whom? Who would just sell it to? It it's only worth $1 billion if you could sell it, and then it's only worth $1 billion before tax. After tax, it's not. So, put things in reality. But we all like stories of success, and everybody wants to have a unicorn. I love the term and all this sort of stuff. I think the mistake people make is digital functions are where we are today, but it's still an analog world. And we are going to put the most of our money in our best people in the company, because if you have something that's digital, I can replicate it. But if you have a person who really can do something a lot better that I can't find, I've got troubles. So companies that want to compete on technology, I don't really think you can do that. You may compete on first mover advantage, so it'd be hard to displace Facebook, but it's certainly technically doable. It's just that they're already there, and that's going to be very hard. When it comes to Bloomberg, this first mover advantage, but we have an enormous amount of data and analytics and a community worldwide which would be very hard to replicate. Somebody will someday. Anybody that thinks that they own the world is wrong. But it's still come back to it's a people world. And having the best people, whether it's a money manager or somebody that cleans the men's room, you want good people, and you've got to make sure in your company that you reward good people and keep them, make it fair, take good care of them when they're in trouble. And I think generally, on average, you'll do better. It doesn't mean everyone's going to work.
When you came back to Bloomberg, you did come back to a different world in terms of technology. You came back to a different company. On some level, you were a different person in terms of your experience. Have you looked at the company at all and said, I don't know if I want to be standalone. Maybe I want to be part of Google. Maybe Apple would be an unbelievable partner for me. Or do you think Bloomberg on its own, now and forever?
Well, forever. When I die, the company goes to the foundation, and they'd have to sell it. I would like to sell it before I die, except they don't know when I'm going to die. Now, somebody pointed out I could fix a date certain, but that's a little extreme, so I'm probably not going to do that.
Who would you sell it to, ideally?
I don't know. It's a very big company, and because it's going to the foundation, it makes it a little more difficult to have a transaction. I'm not worried about that. If we have a great company, it'll all work out. The bottom line is I came back. I didn't really think I was going to come back and work full-time in the company. I thought first I was going to go play golf for a month. That lasted a week and a half. And then I was going to work in the foundation, and that I was part-time, and then the next day a little less time and less time. And I found, then I thought about starting a new company, but there was one with your name on the door already, so why not go there? And it was only 20 blocks away from where I live, so I went back. And what I found is the company had done spectacularly through all of the contractions in the banking industry, and the commercial banks are the big users of Bloomberg terminals. In the aggregate, the buy side's as big as the sell side, but it's hedge funds and money managers and regulators and everybody else that uses the terminals are small in terms of concentration. And what I found was that the company was much more corporate than when I left it, and I'm not so sure had I been here for that 12 years that it wouldn't have become just as corporate.
Doesn't that happen to any company that gets bigger and bigger?
Yeah, in theory, that is what could happen, and in fact, that did happen. But the performance that Grauer and Dr. Ruff and Secunda brought was just spectacular. Through all of the contractions of our big customers, we kept growing. Having said that, I still believe that the ways to compete in the future is to have an awful lot less structure. I want her to go and, sorry to pick on you, seem like a nice person. I want her to go start something and tell me afterwards. Now, you can't have everybody doing that, but you have to have, I keep saying my mantra is beg for forgiveness, not permission. And if you do that, you're probably going to be okay.
Everyone comes to see you. Everyone wants to meet you. They want to talk to you.
I wish that were the case. Salma Hayek never called. Married somebody else.
She still can. Who have you met in the last year? Is there a business? Is there a person? Is there a product that you are excited about, that you just think are great?
I don't know. I got to think about that. I think there are an awful lot of very smart people who really have made a difference. I thought the two guys that were sitting in these chairs before.
Lee and Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I met Paul through Henry Kravis, I think, many years ago, and I look at what these guys have done. They've been great business people, but they're out there really trying to change the world. And my respect is for people. I don't have anything, it's not fair, I don't have anything in common with people that retire. But there's nothing wrong with doing that, I guess. But what I respect are people that do something with their luck, and they understand that it's not just them. They were there, but for the grace of God, they could have gone in a different direction, and they wouldn't have been remotely as successful. But they're not just sitting there and going out and lavishly spending their money. They're out there trying to help others, and they understand that you got to be a good corporate citizen, which is, I've given that speech 1,000 times in Bloomberg. We have offices in 60 or so countries, 170 offices, something like that, and we've got to participate in every place we have an office. We're guests in those cities and those countries, and we have an obligation to do something. And it's those people that I like and those ideas that I like. You know, there's some phenomenal businesses that have been created. There are some great leaders. There are people who are going to cure cancer and educate. And, you know, I'm very proud of my daughters. And yeah, I watched my girlfriend. She's on a bunch of boards, and she spends enormous time working in philanthropy. You know, these are the things that people that I like. That's why I'm with them.
Then is it hard for you to be in New York City? You made such a mark as mayor of New York, and many people here have said, are saying, that the city is getting worse every day. Is it hard for you to well, A, do you agree with that? And if you do, is it hard for you to be in this city that you did so much for, that you made so many improvements upon, and we're starting to reverse?
Well, number one, I've said, and I will stick to this, that either publicly or privately, I will not discuss or talk about my successor, and I've sort of included the governor in it because the governor of New York and the mayor of the city work together, or at least should be working together, and so I won't comment on that. I think if you take a look at New York City, some things will get better, some things will not, some things will go in the other direction. I am worried about the school system and rolling back all of the reforms that were done in 12 years by Joel Klein and Kathy Black and Dennis Walcott. But New York is still the place you want to be. It has the scale, it has the excitement, it has the right geography, it has the diversity that you need. And keep in mind, poverty in New York City, we went from 2000 to 2013, the only major city in the country that didn't have an increase in poverty. Now, I'm not sure what the numbers say after that. I don't even know if anybody's out there with the numbers yet. But there was New York City poor. There's certainly plenty of people that need help. God, you listen, you look at some of these kids that come from broken families, and there's no guidance, and their future. I was with somebody last night, and she said she tutors a bunch of kids, and just listening to the description of some of these kids, they're dealt such a bad hand, and it's really hard to see how you can ever save them. But we have to keep trying. And having said all of that, you're better off in New York City than you are anyplace else. There are fewer bad kids. Now, there are plenty of other places to live. I had the people in that from Tennessee, Bill Frisk and Joanna, I forget her last name, but they did this thing in Tennessee where they're working on education, and they've really made a big difference. In New York City, it's the education system is the key to helping the poor. The rest of us, however, there is enormous construction going on, business creation here. If you want to have a future, I think raising your kids in New York City is the best thing you could ever do for them because they'll understand the whole world. And I'm going to live in this city, so I have nothing but hope for the administration that succeeded us and anybody that comes after that. And I don't sit there and read the papers and the local stories. I see the headline. I've been there, done that. I know what the story's going to be. Some of it's fair, some of it's not. The press always exaggerates once the public buys failure and embarrassment and violence and sex, and so the newspapers argue and the television and radio that they're just succeeding, they're just giving the public what they want. But you know, if you're going to pick one place to live for the rest of your life, you could do an awful lot worse than New York City.
What made you want to start the Cities program, though? When you left office and you saw the impact you had on New York City, why did you want to kind of take this business on the road?
What I did was I took 10 or so of the commissioners that we had in New York City, created a nonprofit consulting firm as part of the foundation, and we work with cities around the world, giving them advice, but rather than these are not consultants, these are the people that actually did it. So Jeanette Sedekan ran 12,000 people working on bicycle lanes and traffic accidents and that sort of thing, and she can give some good advice to another city from somebody that really understands the problem. And so there's a whole bunch of these people in environment and crime and not crime, but corruption and city planning and whatever. And it's a good ways to, it fits in with my interests and expertise, whether I had expertise or not, at least the reputation, so that people think New York did well, therefore the people that worked in the city were the ones responsible, which is true. My job was just to attract them and then to go and spread it around the world. We work in India, we work in Mexico City, we're working all around the world and across the city. Anyways.
Even that is just a small portion of what you do from a philanthropy standpoint. You've given over $3 billion away. Everyone in this room is clearly a supporter of the Robin Hood Foundation, but when you're directing your philanthropic dollars, what's the mission? Both Warren Buffett and Bill Gates have said, choose what your lane is and devote your dollars there. Because someone in your position, absolutely everyone asks you for money.
Okay, well, we have to wrap up, but what we've tried to do is to focus things where other people aren't working on it. So we started working on smoking and obesity, and we do some things that other people work on. We've been lucky to partner with the Gates Foundation in eradicating polio and maternal care. We work on the environment for cities really where the problems are, because that's where the people live. We work on the arts. Those tend to be in the cities and all those things. And we try to do things where we can measure the performance, although we don't measure everything all the time. Some things work, some things don't. Some things you do just because you have the gutsy feeling that it's going to work. And so far, it's been successful. Last year, I think we gave away about $450 million. And it went to organizations that made life better for people around the world. And it's very satisfying. Anyways, our time is up?
No, we have
no, that's the other direction.
All right, then you mentioned obesity. We're gonna end on that because Bill Ackman and I disagreed earlier today. You've done a lot on it. You've studied it. Bill says Coca-Cola leads to obesity, where I say snacks, Burger King. You've actually done the work.
No, the reason that we focused on full sugar drinks, the joke was the big gulp, and we've actually won the big gulp battle. Even though the court stopped us in New York City, sales of full sugar drinks have collapsed. What the Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola company hadn't counted on, their plan B was the diet stuff, except people stopped drinking the diet stuff because they're worried about the chemicals in it. But the reason for you focus on full sugar drinks is they don't have in them the chemical that tells your brain that you're full. So if you eat 500 calories of McDonald's fries, you feel full. If you drink 500 calories of Coke, you're just as hungry as you went in, so it's all additive. Plus, the amount of sugar in it, not only does it make you fat, there is some evidence, although it's not conclusive yet, that a lot of sugar leads to higher cancer rates and that sort of thing. So you really should be well advised to drink a lot less of the full sugar drinks. And what's happened, the same thing happened with cigarettes. Cigarettes and full sugar drinks are now sold to the poor, uneducated around the world. The wealthy, educated have stopped killing themselves, and it's a very tragic thing. Anyways, thank you all for...
Thank you. So, Bill, if you're watching, you were right.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
After you.
Stephanie Ruhle and Mayor Bloomberg, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you for giving us 2 days. Thank you for coming together to save lives. We'll see you next year.